So welcome everyone once more. I'm working for Transitions as the head of Solutions Journalism program, and I will be co-hosting this program together with Transitions Executive Director Jeremy Drucker. And we are also having our wonderful partners from our local partners in Serbia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. We have Albulena here from Kosovo. Hi, Albulena.
Hi.
From Birn, Kosovo, we have Anida from Media Center in Bosnia. Hi, Anida.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
We have Jelena from Novi Sad Journalism School. Hi, Jelena. And we have also Tihomir Loza, who is our colleague at Transitions. They will be helping to get your questions from the chat, because this is your only opportunity to interact with us in the webinar format. But the great thing is that you can also ask your questions in your local language, and our dear colleagues will handle them in your local language. Either they will directly answer or they will bring them up in English to us. The point of this webinar is to bring the very basics of solutions journalism, journalism approach you might have heard of, or maybe this is your very first time. And this will be followed by an advanced session next week. We will tell you more about it at the very end. There will be a 1-hour lecture with me and Jeremy, and that will be followed by a question and answer session. But you can ask the questions like during the whole webinar. There will be also opportunities for clarification questions for you as we talk. So over to you, Jeremy. Jeremy is my dear boss and the director of Transitions.
Okay, thank you, Lucy, and welcome to everyone from a rainy, cloudy day in Prague. Happy to see so many people attending. We are going to try to make this as interactive as possible. So as Lucy said, we have the ability for all of you to ask questions, also in your own native languages at certain points over the course of the next hour or so. But feel free to let us know if we're going too fast or too slow or anything in the chat. So just as a way to introduce the session, we wanted to tell you about the goals for today. Lucy's just sharing her presentation right now. So I will just wait till we have the slide up there so you have it in front of you.
Do you?
Yeah, okay, I think everyone should have it by now. If you could go to the slide about the objectives. Yeah, so these are the objectives for today. We want to define for you very clearly what solutions journalism is, but also what it isn't. Look at examples using the 4 criteria of solutions stories. And these are the criteria that the Solutions Journalism Network has pioneered, and we're going to be explaining that and how you can apply that in your own stories, as well as towards the end of the webinar, show you how you can also identify a solutions angle for stories in your local city, town, country, and region. So those are the objectives for today. We will be going into more depth, as Lucy said, next week when we get into the more advanced workshops. But that's the basic approach for today. So solutions journalism, as you can see up here, is rigorous evidence-based reporting on existing responses to social problems. This is, I think, all the more needed today. And my organization, Transitions, has been stressing that solutions journalism can play a really crucial role today as we all try to cover COVID. We're not going to cover in depth today COVID-related stories, but rather focus on a general approach to solutions reporting. But when we've been giving these workshops over the last couple of years, we do have to do a little bit of convincing sometimes of why solutions journalism is such an important approach. I think now we can see over the last couple of months very, very clearly why we need solutions journalism today. So much of the reporting coming out today just naturally, without people focusing specifically on, are we doing solutions journalism, are we not, has been to try to figure out what countries have been doing to flatten the curve. And that has been automatic among reporters across, well, around the world by now. So this, I think, is very clear. It will become even clearer as we go forward, as we get into finding stories about what's working in terms of also the economic recovery. So I think this is a time where solutions journalism should be rolled out as much as possible around the world. And we're going to talk again, how do you do that not only for COVID stories, but for normal everyday stories. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lucy, who's going to go into some more of those points in more depth, and then we'll be flipping back and forth as we go through the next hour.
Great. So I asked you to take the Gapminder test. I don't know whether you managed, but I really advise to take it. It's quite fun. But those of you who did do it, please type into the chat how many correct answers did you actually have. You can do it right now, right here. Okay. And as sharing the screen, I don't see the answers. So please help me, Jeremy, or anyone.
Yeah, we see 7, 10, 33%.
Okay, wow, that's really good. Well,
23%, yeah, and so on.
Well done. Well, that's not bad at all, to be honest. So you probably understood the point of this test is not to get the highest score, but it shows that we are actually thinking that the world is much worse place than it actually is based on data. All those questions and the answers are actually really fact-checked, and this is what the data shows. But usually we are thinking the world is much worse and the status of the world is much worse, and especially journalists are very skeptical. Journalists are performing the worst among all the groups. So don't worry if you had like 2 or 3 correct. This is quite typical. But what's the point? Why is that? Because there is no wonder we are all having such a bad score, because this is our daily dose of news. This is what we are getting from the headlines. This is what we are getting from press, from online news portals. This is what we are learning about the world. In fact, the world is not an apocalypse on March, but this is what we are getting as a media picture. And we all also sense that this is kind of not really it, right? If you look out of the window, you see that the world is still turning, and actually there are also other things happening than those problems. And of course, we need to know about the problems, otherwise we are not able to look for solutions. But we also need to have some balanced view. The reason why this is the main style of coverage is also no big surprise, because the traditional journalism's theory of change is that the job of journalists is to reveal a problem, to spotlight it, to bring it to the public debate, and then the self-correcting mechanisms will fix it, right? This is the point of investigative journalism. And there are cases where this is really working. That's investigative journalism working, where people resign, systems are reset, and change is happening. Though there are 2 main reasons why change is not happening, because this is what we mostly see, right? Either there is no political will or goodwill for a change, and then there is nothing you can actually do about it unless pressuring and keep pressuring. But very often, the reason why change is not happening is that those in power, the responsible ones, simply don't know what to do about the problem. And this is where you as a journalist can make a big difference by bringing stories that are showing, yes, we can make it differently, and this is how others did it. So to the watchdog, which is really a crucial role of journalism to take care and bring up wrongdoing and spotlight the wrongdoing. We also need the guide dog, which is a different type of dog, right? This is the dog that shows the direction. It also doesn't pull you and doesn't push you to do this. It only shows the options. So solutions journalism is introducing this guide dog. After the problem is revealed, your job as a journalist is not finished, but there is a huge amount of stories that can be told about how others are dealing with the same trouble we are actually having. And what's the point of those stories is not only to bring an idea, a working model that could actually inspire your public debate at home, but it's also to bring the light at the end of the tunnel to your reporting, because we need to know there are ways out of the trouble we are currently all in. And there are many, many problems we are facing, no question about this. But the light at the tunnel is really essential also for us as human beings, because we have certain capacity of bearing negativity. The consequence of too much negativity is that people simply tune out. They don't watch news anymore, because why should I do this to myself? Why should I actually influence my mood, because it has negative effect on me? So people rather watch new Netflix series, and news rooms are actually witnessing that there is a really significant drop in audiences, especially young audiences are really, really hard to attract. The light at the tunnel is actually something we are all needing. So over to Jeremy from the tunnel. You are muted, Jeremy.
Thanks. Thanks, Lucy. So in front of you, I have a quote from Tina Rosenberg, who's one of the co-founders of the Solutions Journalism Network. And again, here you see what Lucy was just talking about, that it's not enough to keep covering problem after problem after problem, because people just, they despair, they get passive, and they tune out, they stop. There have been a lot of studies done, as Lucy said. People simply get tired of watching the news. And we can see that even today. Obviously, the visitor rate, the readership, the viewership of media around the world has gone way up because of COVID. But at some point, a lot of people are going to get just simply exhausted by that, all the negativity, and they are going to look for solutions that are somehow, somewhere trying to make the world a better place, at least with different programs or initiatives and so on. So just, this is a typical story you have up here on the left side. Again, Italy hit by all the new coronavirus deaths, hospitals in crisis. But if you look at the story to the right, this is a New York Times story that started to get beyond that. And this story is actually from March. So it's from quite a while ago and toward the beginning of the pandemic, at least as it was hitting Europe in full force. But already the New York Times journalist was looking at what steps did Italy take to make the situation at least a little bit better. And we've seen more and more stories like that. So if you look about what is the difference, again, it really comes down to inspiring the audience rather than just depressing them all the time. And as Lucy pointed out, again, we're not saying that you don't need those kinds of stories that do highlight problems, but you do need to give people other stories that present hope and some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. What we're talking about is giving a full image of the world. So it's not all the negativity, but also responses, solutions that seem to be working. And it's really, as I said, the whole story, more of a truthful way of looking at the world instead of only highlighting the negativity. So yeah, I'll hand it back to Lucy to explain the 4 qualities of solutions journalism.
So if there is one single slide you should remember or take a picture of, or however remember it, then it's this one. It's actually the essence of solutions journalism. There are 4 qualities of good solutions journalism. It's kind of a very simple checklist, and if you follow them, this will help you to make your reporting high quality. So number 1 is solutions journalism features not just a person, but the response. It's an existing response. It's something that's already happening in the world. It's not about theories. It's about not about what should be done. It's about what's already in place and about people responding to a problem. And the story focuses not only on that it's happening, but especially on how it's happening. It's a how done it story. It's a recipe for a cake. So the second quality is that it provides evidence of impact. It's looking at the effectiveness of the response. It's not only about good intentions. It's not that there are nice people doing nice things. If you pick up a topic, you should be sure that this response is actually really helping, really making a difference. So the question to ask here is, how do I know it's really working? It's not because the leader of the program told you so, but it's because you investigated it and you found out that there is available data proving the impact, number of people that got help, a system that got changed, whatever evidence. And if not quantitative evidence, stats are really the best evidence you can get. But sometimes they are not available. But the more you need to get of qualitative evidence, of statements of people, testimonies, expert opinions, independent people that are not involved in the project, and getting a very colorful like broad view at the problem. So you need to know it's really working, not only that it feels good. Number 3 is an insight. The story provides insight, which for non-natives is a very complicated word for me as well. But this is basically the lessons that others can take from this approach. Is it helpful also to my community? Is it helpful here in Prague, for instance, in the Czech Republic, in Central Europe? This is how you also pick your story. There is a replicable model. It's not only a one-off story that someone is helping somewhere, but this wouldn't help you further with your problem at home, right? You want to bring something that moves your public debate at home, at your community, in your village, in your city, in your region, in your country. So it's not only about the inspiration, but really about what can we learn from Italy. What is the lesson for the world, as we were referring to the New York Times story? What can I learn from Iceland doing something? What can I do? What can I learn from Peru doing something, right? And number 4, very important, but double so important for solution stories as they are positive and solutions oriented. You need to discuss limitations. There is nothing like a perfect solution, and you need to be fair about this. You need to be honest. You need to say, well, this is how the solution works. This is the data proving it's working. This is what we can learn. But also, there are weak points. There are limitations. The question here to ask is, where is this not helping? What is not working with this solution? And it can be people not getting this help. Like, it works for young but not elderly. It works for people from the cities but not from the countryside, or the other way around, because of accessibility or qualified personnel, whatever. Everything what's actually possible blockstone for anyone else to replicate it, they should know about it. And they should also know What were the block stones on the way of the original place of the solution? So those are the lessons that are also weak points. And if you name a weak point, then you can do something about it. If you don't mention limitation, there will be no debate about removing it. And also this makes your reporting more trustworthy. We all know there is no ideal world. There is no unicorns and rainbows around us. And if you don't mention limitations, we are all suspicious, right? So I would start to have assumptions, and my assumptions might be even worse than the reality. But thinking like, there must be a catch. That's not really. We will always think about the weak points, so it's good to mention them. All in all, those are very four criteria good to have in mind when you are looking for the topic of your story and when writing down your story. Thinking, do I have all those qualities somehow represented? And it's important to say there is nothing like a perfect solution story. There is no perfect story. There is no perfect solution. So there is also no perfect solutions journalism. But this is kind of the ideal you should aim for. Good. Are there questions of clarification so far here? So over to our dear moderators, probably. Ladies, do you go?
No, there are no questions until now. Nothing so far.
Okay, good. So either it's crystal clear, which is great, or it's not clear at all, which is not that great. So let's continue then. Okay. Okay. Haha. So here we go. In the email before the webinar, I shared with you a link to a story that we will go through together now. We prepared also the local language translations for you to make it easier for you. So if you have read it, it will help you now. I will go to my, okay. I will go to my screen. And we will slowly go through this story. So this is a story about centers of mental health, which is a service for people that are having mental illness or some mental health issues. And the problem basically was that the very initial problem is that men in the Czech Republic are committing suicide 4 times more than women, like really going and like really killing themselves. And the team of journalists from Czech newspaper Aktuálně CZ decided to cover this problem from a solutions perspective. They actually did a series of stories, one that was very problem oriented and 3 that was actually featuring and explaining ways how to reduce the risk of suicides of men. And one of them was about the center of the health, mental health. If you commit a suicide in the Czech Republic and you are not successful, you automatically end up in a psychiatric hospital. You will get treatment, you will get better, and after you are stabilized, you will get released. But in that very moment, there is no one checking up on you, there is no one to take care of you, there is no one who would actually help you unless you end up in the very same place or worse. And this gap is now being filled with a service that's called Center for Mental Health. So the story shows how it actually works. And if we go through the story, we see that there are many how qualities. So I hope you see my screen, and you can see that it actually shows how it works, that it is a client-oriented approach. There is a team of experts, not only psychiatrists, not just the doctor, but also social workers and other quite rich team that deals with all the aspects of people's life, not only about the medication. It tries to bring them to the normal life and bring them back to hobbies, right? The inside quality actually is, and that's the principle that can be replicated everywhere, is we can help some psychiatric patients with targeted prevention. We can actually identify them before they actually try to do it. So then the story goes and describes more about how it actually was working. We have a protagonist there, Vladimir, who has experienced a suicide try, or he's tried to commit suicide, and he actually used this center. There are some mentions of evidence of the impact. First of all, we have the person who got help and others. Those centers are actually in a high demand, and they are not enough. There are more than one working already in the Czech Republic. But also, and it's a very important evidence, is that this idea didn't fall from out of the sky. This has been brought from somewhere, and in this case, this method or this model was brought from Scandinavia, that was facing a huge level or rate of suicides, and those centers for mental health were really a crucial element of their mental health care reform. So and then we go again. We have another insight here, how the principle works, that all the team members are involved. Not every client always needs the psychiatrist, but the others. And actually, this is not only about the medication. This is actually also about not bringing just a story about how the Prague Center is working, but how to bring a similar principle to your place, because I believe most of the countries are facing this very problem. But if you can take a lesson learned from how Czechs are doing it, for instance, this can help the others to actually open the debate about how to do it. And there are already, of course, limitations. First of all, the patients who need this service most are not learning about it when leaving the hospital, because the information flow is not really there. So the doctors at the hospitals are not informing them about this possibility. And they say we don't have capacity for our own PR, but they don't tell, right? The other limitation is that there is not really a sustainable model of financing, because they know they have finances for 18 months and nobody knows what happens next. And this brings a lot of uncertainty to the program. And also one very big limitation is that, in fact, there is not really official statistics about suicides. They are not followed, and it's hard to actually make any evaluation or any hard data reporting about how it actually is. However, if you didn't name those limitations, they couldn't have been discussed and removed. So the story about this series is that when the journalists were approaching the authorities, for instance, Ministry of Health or others, they were, of course, met with skepticism and with alert on the authorities' side, because those people at the ministry, of course, thought, oh, journalists are, you know, there is nothing worse than a ringing phone and then a journalist on the other side. That automatically means a problem. In this case, that was not about catching them, not the watchdog approach, about catching them that they are not doing their job well. It was rather an invitation to look for a solution together and invite them to the solution. But this is not only a mental, you know, like mindset change in the head of a journalist, but also of the other stakeholders, because they also expect you to be a watchdog. So turning into a guide dog is quite surprising. So therefore, it's really, really good to explain the point of your reporting at the very beginning when you approach the authorities. And this is one of the lessons from this team, because after they published this series, the ministry actually approached them with the note saying like, well, you did a really good job. You brought a lot of useful information. You did a very useful research. We would like to have a debate about what you actually found. Good. So we have limitations. We have lessons about those centers and how can they be replicated, or what's the principle, what's the bigger idea behind it. It's not that much important how they do it in this particular Prague center, but what can be actually taken to your place. There is evidence that this is helping, and there is a lot of how details that after reading it, you have kind of an idea of how it actually works. And of course, there could have been much more of each of the quality, because sometimes it's very hard to get information about any of them. For instance, in case of sensitive topics like suicide, it's very hard to get first-hand evidence of the patients. So they had this man called Vladimir, who is not Vladimir, but he was called so. But ideally, would have more patients. But to bring people to talk about their suicidal experience is not really easy. So it will always have also limitations within your solution story. Good. So are there maybe some questions related to this? Over to our dear chat moderators. Tiho, ladies.
Hi, Lucy.
Yes.
I'm afraid there are no questions related to this particular part. There is just one general comment. Hold on. Something is coming. Okay. From Ula. How did they turn to solution-oriented story? It was a really good example, says Gierke. Okay.
So sorry, what was the question?
So the question is, literally, how did they turn to solution-oriented story? I think it refers to the story that John just focused on.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's very essential, basically, because it was the decision that this will be a solution story was made at the very beginning of the process, and it's really important. The entry point to the story was already from the solutions angle. They didn't want to look and describe the problem, but they started with the solution, and this is what solution journalism does. After you reveal a problem, you start uncovering what's working with this problem. So in this series particularly, it was set up in the way that there was the very first article, which is covering the problem and actually explaining how the problem is working, what is all the data, all the information. And then you you could actually start, like adding the solutions to this. So that was, and this is really important to be clear that you are already starting with the research of a working solution. So they did actually 3 stories. They did one on men jumping under the trains. It is a very typical way of suicide by men in the Czech Republic. And the team found out that in Hong Kong and in Japan, in Tokyo, they installed barriers in the metro stations, like sliding doors, that did reduce the number of people jumping under the train in the stations, while not increasing the number in the next station. So they were focusing on that one. That's number 2 story. But then they found out that this can be done from the mental health care strategy, and then this was the Swedish approach, and then there was another one that was addressing the toxic masculinity and ways for men to actually deal with their emotions and with their failures, and that's the 4th story. So there are 3 different stories of different strategies how the risk of suicide, especially with men, can be reduced.
Right. I think Jeremy will probably address Catherine's question or related to you. Meantime, let me bring Mahir's question to you, which is basically about. Let me translate it. He's basically saying he tries to stick to all of these principles in his stories, in his approach. His issue is how to make it attractive to his audiences. Hold on, there is a, he's explaining it a bit. He's saying, for example, looking at what needs to be covered, I'm just wondering what the best format to tackle this story would be, whether it should be serialized, come in more than one part, perhaps in some other formats such as video, etc.
Jeremy, do you want to, or shall I?
Yeah, maybe I have a suggestion. I know we have a lot of good questions coming in right now. Should we save them rather till we finish with the presentation, or I don't know, Lucy, what do you think? Taking them one by one now, because they're really good ones that are coming in. I think I don't want to skip them, but it would take some time to answer all of them.
Yes, sure. Let's do that.
Okay, so if people could please, I hope you can hang around after the hour finishes and we can really get into these questions, because there's a wealth of material there, but it'll take us a bit of time. And we should perhaps just get through the presentation first for those who truly have to leave after an hour.
Yeah, so over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, well, I hope that's been clear. I think Lucy did a great job of reviewing the 4 criteria in terms of that one story. We wanted to maybe backtrack a little bit and just show you some examples. And this has also been coming up in some of the questions that have already been asked about what is not solutions journalism, because I think a lot of times we see so-called imposters or some types of journalism that have maybe a couple of those criteria, but not all of them. And we wanted to maybe make it a little bit clearer by showing you some examples. So you've probably all seen in your media these types of stories. This is a CNN one here, which is called CNN Hero. This is hero worship in a way that maybe is too strong a word, but these kind of stories that really portray people in communities that are doing wonderful, great things. But it's really focused very much on the individual and not about systematic change. And very hard, impossible to replicate an individual and just bring them somewhere else and have them implement the same program. So solutions journalism might use a character to make a story move and to interest the reader. You can see the story that's mentioned down here below is about a doctor in Guinea who was one of a team fighting Ebola and talks about his own personal story. But that story and true solutions journalism really gets into how is the system changing? What are the details? Much less focused on this wonderful individual. So the next type of imposter that we talk about is these kind of silver bullet stories. I don't know if you have that term in your languages, but in English it means that you have kind of one wonderful, amazing solution that in a blink of an eye solves a problem. And you can see here the way the story is portrayed, it says sometimes a soccer ball is more than just a ball, sometimes it's a lifesaver, which is a really strong way of promoting it, not really talking right there about the details or how the solution actually works. If you got into that article, it did go into more details, but it's very, very dangerous to use that kind of rhetoric. And when we talk about solutions journalism, we're really toning down that kind of language. You can see here, this is a much better way of presenting the story. It's the same topic, but just the way it's presented and the way the story is told gets much more into details, makes it clear that you're not talking about the silver bullet that will save the world, but a solution that can help make a difference, in this case with younger kids who have had a problem using soccer balls that deflate very quickly or get destroyed. And then this is a very typical story, which you might see again in your own media or think tank reports. And again, think tank reports are really important. They do a great job of analyzing problems, proposing solutions, but usually it ends there. It's about theories, it's about things that we might all be doing in order to make the situation better. Solutions journalism is again getting into something that's already in progress, already showing some impact. It might be at the very beginning of the process, but there's already some kind of evidence it's working. This is a great story here about Iceland and how dramatically they dropped teenage drinking rates, smoking rates, drug rates over the course of about 15 or 20 years. It gets into many details about the programs they were running, shows data, shows impact, shows figures, and really gives you a much better idea of how the solution is truly working. And then finally, and we get this a lot, is a lot of people tend to think when they first hear about solutions journalism that somehow it's activism. And a lot of journalists say, oh, I don't want to get involved with that. I'm not an activist, I'm a journalist. Because they think that we're simply, as solutions journalists, pointing out one solution and promoting that. And I'm sure you've seen these types of solutions promoted even now in the pandemic. A lot of people are latching on to certain solutions. Sometimes it's misinformation. Sometimes it might even be true, but they're becoming really activists in promoting that type of solution. You might have seen this in different petition drives and things like that. We want to make very clear that this is not activism. Solutions journalism has a really different approach. And it's, again, reporting on responses to problems, going into depth, not promoting any one solution, simply in a neutral way, talking about a solution that seems to be working and might be applicable elsewhere. So just moving on a bit here, just very quickly, and we're going to go into this more in depth next week, but why to do solutions journalism? I hope we've made clear by now that it can make your reporting more impactful, cover the whole story. This is good journalism. And one thing we should point out, we're not saying that solutions journalism network or transition somehow invented solutions journalism. It's been around from the beginning of journalism. It's just not too many people practice it, unfortunately. So that's what we're pushing for. This is just good journalism, talking about solutions and not about problems. And in case we have some journalists out there that have already thought about, this sounds great, but how do I convince my editor? How do I convince my publisher to do this type of journalism? You can really tell them that studies have shown that it increases audience engagement, readers, and trust. A lot of people, as we've said, have been searching for this kind of journalism. And a lot of the figures have really shown that while you have some sensationalist journalism that captures audience, that quickly fades. But solution stories tend to get read, shared, passed among like-minded people. And also readers start to think that journalists and media are looking out for their problems, but also solutions, and not only trying to stir things up, cause greater distrust in the government, in the media, and always talk about the negative stuff. And then lastly, it can increase revenue, not just through page views, but there have been some good examples, both in the US and even now in the Czech Republic, of sponsorship, different companies sponsoring solutions journalism, because again, it's something positive for the community. And that story that you saw before about suicide levels also is one of the reasons that a group of donors in the Czech Republic decided to create or fund the creation of an education solution section on that same website. So this is happening more and more. So definitely use those arguments as ammunition to try to convince the owners of your media to try to do this type of journalism.
Okay, so let's skip the questions or clarification for now. And let's move to some examples from the Balkans, because we wanted to show that this is not something that's happening just in the US or in the Czech Republic by chance, but solution stories are everywhere. And there are already good solution stories about Serbia and Bosnia and Kosovo, or very close to solution stories. And there is definitely potential for covering the responses to the problems. So let's start with the examples from Serbia.
Yeah, so these are just a quick couple that our partners found. This is one that Tina Rosenberg, again, we already mentioned her, one of the founders of the Solutions Journalism Network, did about Otpor in Serbia. I'm sure everyone has heard of Otpor, which was the student movement that helped topple Milosevic back in the year 2000. This article is about how they've traveled the world since then and have been advising other movements. And farther down in the article, she gets into the different myths about civil disobedience, and uses the examples of Otpor, not just in Serbia, but some other places where they've been advising to make the case that some methods work better than others, and to dispel some of the myths around, as I said, civil disobedience. So that was a really good example from Serbia. And then there was one more, which I think it was from Serbian television, went to Finland and looked at a case there about how Finland has been quite successful in driving down the levels of homelessness. Many places in Europe and around the world, homelessness has been increasing, but here in Finland, it has been going down due to a policy of giving people homes, not just temporary shelter. So yeah, that's it from Serbia.
Mm-hmm. So just the example from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So for instance, this article is from Civic Ideas, and it's about young people that are actually bearing, there is a transgenerational problem based in the war and the ethnic conflicts. And this is about a program that's trying to bring young people from all the communities across the region, the Bosniaks and the Serbs, through the art and through activism, to actually educate and prepare young leaders and young people to be able to stay and be future leaders for their country, because the country is experiencing a huge exodus of young people who are not seeing their future there. And this program is actually showing, this is a theater group where they are, and it's for many years, it's not just one-off program, where the young people are supposed to bring the topic and make their own place as well about the issues, what they are, for instance, having in their families, addressing the traumas of the war, the transgenerational traumas that are inherited within the families, and how the cooperation across among the young people can actually help to bring like future to the region. And speaking about the exodus, this is another story that actually shows it's very complicated for young people to find a job because the unemployment rate is very high in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this story is actually showing well in tourism, and especially in the field of tourism guiding. This is especially attractive for young people. It's very important for them because they learn some very important skills for their life, for their future careers. And the problem is they are not staying. So the story gets also into like what can be done about making the people and young people not to think about immigration but rather to stay. And then coming to Kosovo, we were actually talking about looking for the bridges between communities. So this is a similar story from Mitrovica about a rock school, a music school that is having people from Mitrovica that's divided into Serbian and Albanian ethnicity. And people from one side have maybe never walked over the bridge to the other side until they started to visit this school. And then there are mixed bands with young people that are actually experiencing that they can work together, they can create something together, and they can actually build common future together. So through projects like this, this actually shows the young generation how to live together and how to actually tear borders, not only physically or crossing the bridges only physically, but also in people's heads. But there are also limitations, and they are mentioned in all of those stories. Those are not unicorn stories about how the world is perfect. There are very many things. For instance, the idea of the people going to the other side of the city and joining the other part and having a mixed band is not really popular among not popular for all of the people. And for instance, people from this school are experiencing hate speech and hatred comments on their Facebook and so on. So this is only to show that this is not moving the reality out of the space, but it's also naming what's the weak point of it. It's not solving it as the silver bullet. Good. And one example from Kosovo that's not solutions journalism by the definition, but is a good start. It's the very first step for looking for constructive content, not only about the coverage we were showing at the very beginning about what's the problem, what's not working. It's important to know, but covering the responses. This article in Pristina Inside is actually listing many initiatives that started to emerge after the COVID-19 pandemic, and how industries and entrepreneurs and young people and schools, technical schools, many stakeholders started to actually do constructive stuff and started to help. So this article is not a solution journalism because it doesn't analyze a particular model or a particular issue, but this is a great source of inspiration, and each of the approaches mentioned there is worth a solution story. Good. So when is the right time to do solutions journalism? That's the million-dollar question, because it's not always the very moment for it. As we mentioned earlier, we need first the audience to understand there is a problem, because if there is no understanding of we are having a problem, people are not interested in how to solve it, right? So the first question you need to ask is, what's missing in the public debate? Do people know we are having a problem? If not, you need the traditional investigative journalism, the problem-oriented journalism, bringing it up to the spotlight and highlighting it. But then you need to ask the question, do people know what to do about the problem? Do we have a response? Because many times we do know, and systems are in place but are maybe not used enough, or policies are in law, they by paper, they are actually there, but they are not actually exploited, right? And in this case, you need to just pressure and keep pressuring. But if we don't know, if the answer is no, we are lacking ideas, we are lacking inspiration, we are lacking strategies what to do about this. This is the right time for solutions journalism, because all of us have probably experienced this typical political approach, like, oh yes, we know this is a very serious problem, but there is nothing we can do about it. Oh really? By bringing stories of others taking an action with this particular problem shows that this removes the excuses. This actually makes a problem that was unavoidable, and it makes it unacceptable. And it's a very, very important change in the public debate. How come we cannot do anything about it if the next door village or our neighboring country, wherever, they actually made a progress by using that or this strategy? So the right moment is very key. And then this is when you are identifying what is your problem and what is your solution, then that's the moment for hunting for the candidates. So first you need to ask, what is the issue? What is the problem? Then you are asking, is there knowledge about how to solve it, or do we need to provide it? And if not, then you are looking for others doing it better. Good. So the key question to ask here is actually, who is doing it better? We at home are not performing well, right? We are having the problem. So how about looking around, who is doing it better? And this is where I hand over to Jeremy. Jeremy, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay, so yeah, so as Lucy said, a key part, and really the first question you often ask is who's doing it better, and also where you might find these stories. So maybe we can just start listing them, and I can just very quickly go through this. Yeah, so think tanks. I brought up think tanks before, and again, think tanks might not always be the place to find the solutions. Sometimes it might be theories, but a lot of times it's really effective to try to find an expert in the topic, whether it's education, the environment, corruption, whatever it might be. Often those people are going to know, often better than a journalist, unless it's that journalist beat or specialty about where to find those stories. Same with academics. I always say that there's an academic who's an expert in everything. You might not have them in your local university, but definitely somewhere in the world, there's at least one or two experts on that particular problem. And again, they're the ones who should know who's actually doing it best, who's actually making progress, who's showing impact. Also, large data sets for the data journalists out there. I think you can really, really look and find the outliers in particular data sets that will tell you this person or organization or city or town is doing something better. When we say outliers, we mean the people that somehow are different from the crowd. Those are often the people that are making progress. You could look at the rates of people getting healthy or not in a hospital or a school where you say that you see the data as much higher graduation rates. That's a great place to start. Again, people involved in implementation, these might be they might be donors, they might be even public officials, they might be NGO people, kind of anyone involved in implementing a solution to a problem can be a good source. Yeah, and also people involved in the problem. Again, those are the type of people that know the problem really well and might be hearing about some initiative that's been showing progress. So those are good people to also talk to. networks of innovators, incubators, hubs, anything like that, those are often people that know other people who are change makers, people who are doing something to make progress. So that's a good place to look as well. Foundations also, program officers, of course, they're going to probably talk about their grantees, and you'll have to dig deeply to find out if those grantees are actually showing as much progress as it seems, but that's a good place to start as well. Yeah, and then hold up a mirror to your own life. We've had a lot of people come up with stories just by coming across different businesses or organizations on their way to work, or they buy a coffee from a cafe that employs disabled people. So there are a lot of places where you would just see progress, say something innovative, see a solution that might be solving maybe part of your own life, and think, is there something there to write about? And then the solution story tracker is a great source. I think there's now, what, Lucy, over 8,000 stories that have been vetted, meaning people over at the Solutions Journalism Network read through every single story and decide, does this fulfill the 4 criteria? Is this a good example to promote of solutions journalism? So that's a really, really great source. And you can also search there under topic, region, and some other search possibilities. Yeah, and then these are key questions to ask also. These are, again, we've mentioned these, and I want to go through them really quickly because we're already running out of time for the basic presentation. But number 1 is who's doing it better. Then you're going to look at how does the response work? Where did the idea come from, really start to finish? Is it being replicated elsewhere? This is really key to find out, is it going to work in your own town, city, school, or whatever? It's great proof if it's already gone somewhere from the original site of the solution and has been adapted somewhere else. Yeah, what do research and critics say? How to measure success? We've talked about the data, the impact. This is something, there have been some questions about how do you get away from advocacy and so on. One way to do that is really hard data. As long as you have hard data from trustworthy sources, no one's going to really accuse you of playing favorites because you're basing it on data. You're not just basing it on opinion of someone saying this is a great solution. And then what ways is that response working? Being very honest. If it's not working completely, explain that, say that, and then always talk about how do we know. Again, a way to build trust among your readers that you're not playing favorites or doing advocacy journalism is that you're really explaining where did the data come from, what are the sources, who are the experts, what are the critics saying about this problem.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jeremy. So this is, in a nutshell, how the method is working. And because we know that the key for the success is to practice, we are opening microgrant and mentoring programs in several Central and Eastern European countries. And currently, there is an open call for story pitches from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Serbia. The deadline for submissions of the pitches is 24th May. And this webinar and the one that's following next week is supposed to kind of give you the very basis and for you to know what we are actually expecting by a good solution story pitch. So hopefully for now, you already know what we are looking for. And to make it a bit easier for you, we would like to list a few useful tools. And also, sorry, I forgot to mention, there are also other microgrants or mentoring programs across the region. There is one currently open for Turkey's Wave as well from the project Zoom, for instance. So it's not only us who are kind of supporting this approach, but we have like allies across the region. If you are not from those 3 countries, watch our website. We are also sharing their information about the current calls. So talking about our website, this is our website where you actually get examples of best practice from the region, all possible videos of speakers, including webinars, and also information about the microgrant and mentoring. Mentoring is actually very important. It's not only about giving the journalist the money, but we are guiding you through the production process to make sure that there are all the 4 qualities incorporated in your story, and your story stays solutions oriented and doesn't turn into a problem oriented one. And most importantly, this is a must read for everyone who wants to do solutions journalism. This is Solutions Journalism Network's basic toolkit. It's an online tool developed by a New York-based organization that's our most important partner, because we are basically localizing their know-how and their methodology. And the great news is that right now, the toolkit is available in Albanian, in Serbian, and in Bosnian. And there are also several more Central European and Eastern European languages. So this is definitely a link to go for you if you are interested in doing solutions journalism. And Jeremy mentioned Solution Story Tracker. It's a gold mine of solution stories. And the important thing to stress here is that this is not an automatic upload database. The stories are submitted, and then members of Solutions Journalism Network or people from the network are reading them, actually deciding whether this is or not meeting the criteria, tagging them, and then they are added to the database. You can browse it. It's a great procrastination toy. You can browse it according to several criteria, keywords. There is a sustainable development goals tab, for instance, where they are tagged according to this. A great source for knowledge, what has already been written about the topic you want to cover, and also what has been done about this issue in the world. Good. And as I mentioned, there will be also number 2 of this webinar. Over to Jeremy to share more information about this.
Yes, so as we said, we thank you very much for listening in for the last hour. This was really an introduction, and we're going to go on and answer some questions, but hopefully you want to learn more. And next week, you can see here, we have two times set for the next advanced sessions. So you can see Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, May 18th at 2 p.m. and Kosovo on the 19th at 11. And we hope you'll join us for that. We'll be going through more stories, and we do have a little bit of homework for you. And I think some of you have already raised this in the chat, but what is one story you've done, read, or we could say, what are you working on too, that could benefit or could have benefited from a solutions angle? Because I hope one thing that you got from listening over the last hour is really that this is kind of the next step for many stories that you might have done, where you uncovered the problem, and you at the time might have thought a little bit about the solution, but now we're hoping that you will really think about that from the start, and try to convince your editors and publishers to also take that to heart. Our goal is really that across the region, every media outlet will start to have those discussions when they start debating about what stories do they have coming up, and at least someone around the table will say, well, we all know the problem. What about the solution? Where is it working? What's something else that we could explore to give some people some optimism that the solution is actually possible to solve? Yeah, so thanks for your attention. Now we'll get back to some of those questions. So I hope people can still stay around for another 20 minutes or half an hour. A lot of good questions there, and we'll get into them now.
So how about our dear chat managers? Would you bring some questions up?
Yes. Hi. I think it'd be good to start with a question that will give you an opportunity to actually explain again on a good example what is and what isn't solution journalism. The question is from Blerta. She's basically painting a reporting scenario, and she says in Kosovo the poverty levels are pretty high. So many times we have people coming to our TV studio and asking us to do a story about their difficult life, about their situation. So sometimes they do a story, and then some good people see that on telly and, for example, build them houses or bring them food or help them in some other way. So the question is this solution journalism?
Lucy, do you want to take that?
Well, from what I'm hearing, it's not. And the reason why it isn't is that there is no systemic approach, systemic solution, or a model, a replicable model about it, because it's a single case story. So it's good, and it's also feel good journalism, right? So some people got helped, but actually it stayed at this individual level, and it doesn't change the system. But if there was a story about another place that was facing a similar challenge, like high poverty, and then which kind of consequences of the poverty. It's also important to identify what particular problem you are addressing. Poverty is a very broad topic, and it has sub-problems. I'm always saying a problem is like a bar of chocolate. You need to break it down to be able to eat it. And the same is for the problems and solutions. There is no solution or a response. Let's call them responses. It's not about the perfect solutions. There is no response to an abstract problem, to poverty, climate change, air pollution. There is no single solution to that. But if you break it down and you go more to the concrete level, like what kind of poverty and where? Is it about education and access to education? Is it about basic hygiene conditions, access to running water or whatever? And then you can look for places that were facing similar issues, similar challenges, and look for strategies, how they addressed them. And then looking for the one that could be most helpful to you. This is about this third quality, the lessons learned, right? What can we learn from the other community in, I don't know, in other European country, in Romania, in Hungary, in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, wherever, that could be useful at your community. And then looking for those systemic approaches that could be introduced in your place. And that is what solution journalism is aiming for the systemic changes. Jeremy, would you add something?
I would only say with that particular story, as Lucy said, if it was beyond just an individual effort and there was an organization that was systematically building houses, then you could write a story about that organization and how really from start to finish, they've been able to fund that kind of program, build the houses. What are the challenges? Are there different parts of the community where it's not possible for some reason? Is it a funding issue? So you would really have to know, is this a one-time thing, or, as Lucy said, a kind of systematic attempt to change the situation for the better?
Yeah, it's also important to actually clarify, where are you looking for the solution? Is it in your own country? Are there already successful programs in place that you could report and show, like, look, we are actually not that bad in education because there are schools that are doing better, and the others could take a lesson from them and actually follow them. Or you are not having a good enough example yet in your country, and then you are looking elsewhere to bring that knowledge back to home. And this is also important for you to clarify, where are you looking for this case study. The solution story is actually an analysis of a successful or working case study.
Right. Perhaps another question on distinguishing what is and what isn't solution journalism from Murat. And it's regarding his idea to do a reporting assignment on trans individuals in Turkey who face problems when they get a new government issue ID card that reflects or should reflect their new gender. So I'm quoting now, I'm reading, if I find a comparable country that has recently and successfully overcome this problem and featured their solution prominently in my narrative, would this be sufficient to be considered solution journalism? Many thanks.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like a good case study for a solution story to me. So if the core of your story is how the other country actually did it, what were the insights? What are the insights for your actual public debate at home, and what are the limitations of that approach? And you are not spending so much time with the problem. Of course, you need to introduce a context, but it's not that you are spending half of your article with the problem and then just at the end, adding, well, by the way, there are programs dealing with that. If the core of your story is how they did it, this is a good starting. This is good thinking about where to look for solution stories to me.
Right. Thank you. And let's perhaps address two questions on the difference between solution journalism and advocacy. So the first one is from Fitim and the other one from Shipe, and I'll just read them. By doing solution journalism, is there a risk ending in advocacy or supporting individuals, politicians, or state organizations? How do we avoid this risk? And the other question is there a link between solution journalism and advocacy journalism? A link in terms of principles, qualities, and journalism's theory of change?
Yeah, well, those are tough questions. I think this is something we get all the time, and as I said early on, it's often journalists who have a lot of experience with, say, investigative reporting that are the first to say, "I'm not going to get involved. This is advocacy," and usually it takes a bit of time to explain the difference between advocacy journalism. In my opinion, advocacy journalism can also be very important, but it's very much promotional. It's very much with the language. It's talking about this is a solution, it's great, it should be adopted, and it's pretty one-sided, and I think it would be rare that you would talk about the limitations to the solution. Again, with solutions journalism, if it's going to fulfill all four of those criteria, you're going to always mention the limitations. And as Lucy pointed out, no solution is perfect. And it could be a funding issue, it could be certain types of people that solution is not applicable to. It could be the size of a hospital, the size of a school, the student body. There's always something which presents challenges. So I think that's probably one of the main differences. Advocacy journalism also, I would say, doesn't always, even though it should, depend on data as much as most solution stories do, where the data, the ways to track the impact is really central to the story. And again, you're going to talk to the critics as well. You're going to talk about the limitations. So I think that's one aspect. Lucy, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe I think it's really important to be clear what is your role in the whole show. As a journalist, you are not supposed to be a PR agent of the solution. You need to take a distance and also be honest about that not everything is perfect with it. Keeping the four qualities in mind can help you, but also go for contradictory opinions, go for critical points, constructively critical points, not the ideological points of you like this is all bullshit and this shouldn't be done, but like there might be academics or experts saying, well, you know, there are some catches with this problem and you need to say it. And also, you are not obliged to the project to paint it pink. You know, you are reporting and you are bearing witness about what's happening, and this also has weak points. The important thing is that you base it in data, as Jeremy said, and then you are also backed for yourself being accused of advocacy. If you can say, well, but I know I am writing about this topic because I know it's working, and it's not just because somebody told me, but they have real impact, then you are more safe. And Tina Rosenberg says it's really important for solution journalism to be safe on this side, because in traditional journalism, being wrong in a negative or like problem-oriented story is a minor crime. You know, you will be criticized, but it will be somehow forgiven. If you do the same with positive story, if a constructive one, you will that's a major crime, because you will be found as a fool, as not doing your job well. You have been you know tricked by PR department of that organization, and this is what you don't want. And also, if you, and I think this is the crucial here as well, you are not supposed to make decision for your readers. You are presenting facts, and you let the reader decide whether this is good or not for their community. And of course, by choosing the topic already, everyone is doing subjective choices, right? Also for negative stories, you are doing subjective choices. But then don't use the judging words like great, genius. Don't push the judgment on your readers. Let them decide. They are smart enough to see whether this is working or not.
Right. I think there are two questions that probably relate to sequencing of your reporting, solution journalism reporting assignment, and more broadly with the question of at what point does a story become a solution journalism story? So the first one is from Donica. She's basically asking whether, I assume, whether you could first write a story about the problem and then perhaps address possible solution later, presumably in subsequent stories. And then there is another sort of related question from Valdetta. She's giving a specific example. She's saying, I'm planning to do a story on COVID-19 psychosocial impact in Kosovo. According to available statistics, an increase of domestic violence cases has been noted. How can I turn such a story into a solution journalism? I suppose she's asking whether she can simply first write a story to state the problem and then perhaps later address possible solutions.
Yeah, well, in terms of the first question, it goes back to that slide that Lucy showed about when is a good time to do solutions journalism. And definitely, if the problem is not well enough understood by people, you might have to start your article or even a series of articles by getting into the problem. I can't remember if Lucy mentioned it or not, but the issue of male suicide in the Czech Republic was not widely known. There were a lot of people that might have known someone or had a family member who tried or committed suicide. But as a society, I think people were not well aware that this was such a huge problem. So the first article explained the problem before getting to the solutions. So that was an important point where it was really needed. You would have to know, and you know much better than we do, if in your societies these issues are already well enough known issues like corruption or whatever it might be, where you don't have to document it and detail it, and you could already go towards talking about working solutions. I think just quickly about the second issue, that would be an example where it would be difficult, but you'd have to find out, are there similar situations before? Maybe it would have been in Asia where they had pandemics before and people were forced to stay at home, domestic violence went up. Were there different initiatives that at the time were undertaken in, I don't know, Taiwan or South Korea, or where there were Thailand, where there were other pandemics that showed some progress in cutting into those high rates of domestic violence? I don't know, was there a hotline set up? Were workers trying to visit those people? Because it would be really difficult to do that story now. And I think that's something really to stress as we talk about solutions journalism in COVID. In some ways, we have to adjust our terminology even, because a lot of the reporting that we're seeing are really more about responses, and really hard to say that those are solutions right now because it's still too early. And you might have a response that seems to be working, but are we confident enough to call that a solution that will be working 3 months from now or 5 months from now? So I think it's very important to make that distinction. And I think with that particular story, it'd be really difficult to find evidence that some kind of program is already working. But maybe, I mean, maybe some countries have already been down and under lockdown for 2 months. Maybe there are some initiatives that did something after a month, and already the rates of domestic violence are looking better, are lower. So you'd have to look around. I don't know, Lucy, do you want to add anything to that?
That's fine, yeah. Also, I saw we are having some questions in local languages, so
I remember earlier we referred to Mahir's question about how to actually make your story attractive to the audience, as to not, so that the story is not just seen as just another sort of positive, quiet story. So he's specifically asking how to structure the story, whether to use other formats, whether to use video, etc.
Well, what's good about solutions journalism is that it's a method that's applicable for all formats and for all possible ways of reporting. And it's up to you to judge what is your audience interested in. And also, another thing that goes very well with solutions journalism is engagement journalism. So some newsrooms, especially in the US, but also in Europe, are actually using the interactive way, asking their audiences, what are you interested in? What should we investigate for you? So for instance, what solutions are you interested in that we will investigate for you and present for you, because we know how to do story, we know how to investigate, how to work with the facts and so on, and you know what is important in your life, right? So the data shows that solutions journalism is attractive for readers because they spend more time on the page, they share it more widely. Breaking news is going up like that and then dropping quite quickly again, while solution story has an organic reach, so it grows slowly but reaches further because those stories are stories people get back to or share it or refer to it, and also talk about them when they talk to their friends, for instance. And this is what you want your story to be discussed in a pub, right? So we have data showing that this is particularly interesting for young audiences, because young people have enough of problems. They are facing problems every day. We are all overwhelmed with the tsunami of bad news from the news. But it is actually called bringing in a different type of interaction and relation with your audience. And this is also a strategy how your newspaper can be really relevant to people's life, because you are bringing the light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, we can do something about it. And this is how it can be done. This is what media can actually bring to people's daily life, especially at the regional level or community level. It doesn't need to be the big changes at the national legislation. Yeah? It can be about waste management in your village, or about public lighting, or I don't know, playgrounds for kids. So it's up to you. Sometimes a series is good because you have multiple approaches to the same problem, and each of them is worth a story. Solutions journalism is not a laundry list of what can be done.
Right, thank you, Lucy. There's another question that relates to what is and what isn't solution journalism from Zoran. He's referring to Serbian government's decision to give 100 euros to every 18 plus citizen. And it was colloquially called helicopter money in Serbia. And he's saying, but the society is pretty much divided. Those who are against the ruling party, they say they don't want to take that money. On the other hand, people are saying that they will take the money and give it to charity. I know it sounds ironic, but could we say that actually it is one kind of a solution to help others who are in need to overcome post-COVID times, even though it comes from something not quite so good, a divided society?
Lucy, feel free to take that one if you want.
Well, I will just repeat my mantra about the four qualities, right? So do you have enough evidence that this approach is really working? Do you know that it has an impact? I would start with that. Or is it just an initiative? And can it be replicated elsewhere? That's the questions you are asking, because you want to bring a recipe. Is this the recipe your community is needing right now, right here? Or is it just an initiative among many? Jeremy, would you add something?
I would only add that one thing which we often talk about is when you're talking about a solution, it should be some kind of systemic discussion. It shouldn't be just something that you're throwing money at. Because you could say a solution for any problem is to have $5 million, right? That you can spend in ways you want, but it should be more about the process, more about the system, more about the ways the solution is working beyond simply throwing money at the problem, because it's something which you cannot usually replicate. Simply coming up with that kind of money to fund one solution somewhere. Just an example very quickly, there's a great story about a solution in Norway with prisons and how much money was invested into completely redoing the whole Norwegian prison system. And a lot of it comes down to the amount of guards per prisoner. But there are other elements to it, treating the prisoner as a potentially productive member of society once they get out, education, stuff like that. So at first glance, it does look like it's just a question of money, but there is an underlying philosophy to the problem which you would write about, more than just the money aspect. So for this particular story, did the handouts lead to a change of, I don't know, mind among the people who received the money? Is there some kind of longer term aspects to it rather than them just getting the money and spending it on their rent? So I think these are the kind of things you would have to look at to really decide if this is some kind of true solution or just, as I said before, a short-term response to COVID that might work for a week or two, but then that's it.
Right. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Lucy. I think Jelena is making a point about something we addressed earlier, Murat's question, and she's asking whether we can actually whether someone can apply for our grant, for our scheme, with a story that addresses a problem in another country, in this case, Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I would just encourage people, if they're looking about applying for the grant program, really do your homework about the solutions, because I think one of the biggest things we've seen over the last couple of years is a lot of people applying with a particular problem, but they really haven't looked into the solution yet. They're just assuming that they're going to find the solution somewhere, and it's really hard for us to make a judgment on whether this is a good solution story without really having the solution. So I would really encourage people to really do your homework, do some digging. You don't have to have all the answers. We don't expect you to have talked to a lot of people, but at least find out that there is a solution working somewhere. I think that's really key.
Yeah. This is what we are also asking people in when doing your pitch. We are actually asking nothing but those 4 qualities. You should have already a certain level of knowledge of the approach you want to report, and we are curious about this. It's not that you have only the topic and then you will actually explore it afterwards. You need to have a basic knowledge about it already before you start. And it may be important to stress one of the lessons journalists we are working with are always sharing with us is that the research work is really important in general, but it's so much important for solutions journalism to make a proper research and really good investigation before you start doing the story is the key for success. So by traditional journalism, the story is usually done as you go. You catch it on the way and you add the elements. But if you do this with solution story and then you find out that, well, actually, the approach might not be that well working as it seemed from the internet website, or I have actually no sources to talk to. This happened to the Czech team as well. They wanted to write about the public transportation, the barriers in the underground, and their source was the study. And I asked them, so did you talk with someone from the public transportation authority in Tokyo? Did you talk to the people who implemented those barriers and so on? And they say not, and thought it will be one Skype call. And it turned out it was pretty complicated to get a Japanese person from the public transportation company to talk about it because of the language, because of the culture, whatever. And they needed to solve it. By coincidence, they had a colleague in Tokyo by that time, so they managed to get that information. But sources and who you are going to talk to are really important to identify quite early.
Right, I think we've exhausted the pool of questions.
Wonderful. The local languages questions are also addressed by now?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay, ladies, anything?
Country coordinators will be able to confirm that.
Yeah.
Yes, because we translated them and then TO read them out. So
Great, thank you.
Wonderful.
I think there was actually one question all the way at the beginning that we maybe skipped over because we were talking at that time, and maybe we could just close with that one because I know we're already over time. But the question is, what are the biggest obstacles, I think, for journalists to do solutions journalism? And it's a great question. And I would say maybe a couple quick things, and I'm sure Lucy will have something to add. But I think the start is really a change in mentality. And I think we've hopefully made that clear that you just have to approach a story differently than you might have been used to, where you were doing really, really important work uncovering a problem. And now you want to do this, put in the same amount of effort and in-depth reporting into writing about the solution, not just putting it at the very end of the story and thinking a last paragraph about who's doing it better in Finland or Germany or wherever is enough, but really describing in detail. Because I think we haven't really gotten into this, and I guess we'll talk about it next time, but one of the end goals of this is not just doing good journalism, but also trying to motivate your audiences and get them more involved civically. And one of the only ways that can happen is if we're describing solutions that are working somewhere else, and we're doing it in a sufficient way to really get people mobilized. And I know I shouldn't be saying that, because maybe that's going against some of the what I've been saying against advocacy journalism, but I think a lot of us got into solutions journalism because we wanted to get back to the roots of journalism in describing not just problems, but solutions, and also trying to mobilize people to become more active citizens and kind of believe more strongly that democracies are the right types of society to answer problems. And the only way that's going to happen is if we're describing the solutions with enough depth that people are going to be thinking, okay, what my politicians are saying isn't really true. There are answers to some endemic problems. And if we describe them well enough how they're working somewhere else, maybe more and more readers will get motivated enough to get angry and really demand solutions. So I think that's part of what we're talking about. And also another obstacle is trying to get beyond thinking that this is all highly resource driven. You need tons of money to do it. You have to spend months and months doing these types of stories. That can be true for certain types of stories, but if you look in the tracker, you will see a lot of shorter types of solutions journalism, multimedia. So as Lucy said, there are a lot of different formats for doing this type of journalism. And you shouldn't think that you're never going to win that battle with your editor to allow them for you to work on a story for 3 months and it's going to cost thousands of euros and so on. There are different ways to do it. And I would say that's often what we get in terms of possible obstacles. It's going to be too expensive to do. It doesn't always have to be. So maybe I'll hand it over to Lucy for some final words. Yeah. Obstacles.
I can't only stress that solution journalism is not activism journalism, but it's activizing journalism. And there is a significant difference, because by your reporting, you can activize citizens to take action and do something, demand something. I cannot stress it more. And I think Jeremy said it, like solution journalism might be one of the responses to the crisis of the media as we are living it. It's not a perfect solution, and it has its limitations as well, as every other response. One of them is that quality journalism is demanding time and qualification as well. You will not make a good quality story in 2 hours by copy-pasting agency news. That's simply it. It is quality reporting, it's journalism work, and it's the high top-class journalism. And it's an investment. So it's also about the management of the newsrooms to actually decide what kind of content they want to provide to their audiences, and the way you can help it and contribute it is to do good solution stories that will prove that this is useful not only for your citizens but also to the business model of your employer. So this is where I would maybe close. Our microgrant program is actually aiming to enable you to go and try solutions journalism with as much support as we can give you. And our goal is to actually create a good enough pool of local solution stories that could be a good reference point for future. This is solutions journalism made in Serbia. This is Kosovo-made solutions journalism. This is Czech-made solutions journalism, because this is not only a thing that is happening in the US, and we need it more than ever.
Yeah, and I would just, the final thing I would say, really final thing, because you've all been very patient, and thank you for staying with us to the very end. Really just go out and try this type of journalism. We've really seen a hunger across Central and Eastern Europe. There are a lot of journalists that are frustrated with the media and the negativity, and they really feel that this gets them back to why they became a journalist in the first place. So we hope you'll find that as well. So maybe we'll close it there. I'd like to thank all of our moderators, Tiho, Anita, Albulena, hope I pronounced that correctly, and Yelena. Did I remember everyone? I hope so. Okay, so thanks very much. Please feel free to send us additional questions by email. You will get the presentation, and I believe we're going to share the recording as well. And otherwise, hope many of you decide to join us next week. And also, I should say, Transitions is very open to your own solution pitches also. So we'd love you to apply for the grant scheme, but even beyond that, please think of us as a place to publish all those hundreds of solution stories that you're now going to be producing. So thanks very much and hope to see you next week.
Yeah, thank you so much. When leaving, if you find a minute, please fill in the questionnaire, or you can fill it later on in our follow-up message. And this is the very goodbye word. Thank you so much for your patience and have a nice afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.